This is HOA nuisance files. And the timeline is absurd. I am standing in my front yard in Colorado Springs, Colorado at 7:30 in the morning holding a post hole digger, and Vanessa Moore is screaming at me from 6 feet away that I am violating Section 12-4 of the Redwood Landing Association covenants, and she is going to fine me daily until I give up and cry. She is holding a coffee tumbler in one hand like a prop and waving a rolled-up survey map in the other, her gray visor slightly askew, her short bob shaking with every word. Behind her, my contractor is standing next to his truck with his auger still running, looking at me like he wants permission to leave. I moved to this neighborhood 8 months ago because I needed something stable after a divorce, and I work as a civil engineer who hates sloppy paperwork, so I thought an HOA would at least keep things predictable. I was wrong. The Redwood Landing Association is a community where the portal is full of fence photos and accusations. And Vanessa Moore runs the finance committee like a personal fiefdom, adding mysterious line items to every quarterly statement, and no one ever questions her. Because she has been here since the development, NT broke ground. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks ago when I submitted a fence permit application to replace the rotting pickets along my back property line. The old fence was falling apart, half the posts were leaning, and my homeowner's insurance had sent a letter saying they needed proof of boundary maintenance or they would not renew my policy. I filed the application, paid the $50 review fee, and waited. 2 days later, Vanessa showed up at my door with a clipboard and told me the application was denied because the proposed fence exceeded the height limit by 2 inches and encroached on a drainage easement that did not exist on any official plat. I showed her the survey I had ordered, which clearly marked my property line and showed no easement. She smiled, tapped the clipboard, and said the HOA has its own records and those are what matter. I told her I would take it to the board. She laughed and said she is the board, which is not technically true but close enough because the president is her neighbor and the secretary is her sister-in-law. I left it alone for a week thinking maybe she would calm down. Instead, she escalated. A vendor arrived at my door claiming he needed to verify fence compliance and provoke a reaction. He was polite but clearly sent by Vanessa, carrying a laminated checklist and a camera. I asked him to leave. He said he was just doing his job. I closed the door and immediately checked the HOA portal. Someone had uploaded 6 photos of my backyard fence line with timestamps altered to make it look like I had started construction without approval. The photos were recycled from the previous owner's file, dated 2 years ago, but Vanessa had edited the metadata and posted them as current violations. That same afternoon, I got a notice in the mail. It was printed on Redwood Landing Association letterhead, signed by Vanessa Moore, and it stated that I was in violation of Section 12-4, that my fence work was proceeding without authorization, and that I owed a $200 fine payable within 10 days or the amount would double. The notice also included a line that said continued non-compliance would result in daily fines of $100 and potential legal action. I called the management company. They said they had no record of any violation, and that Vanessa was not authorized to issue fines on her own. I asked them to intervene. They said they would look into it and get back to me. They never did. I swallowed my anger, because I knew the moment to use it was coming. I started documenting everything. I saved every email, every portal post, every photo Vanessa uploaded. I made copies of the original survey, the insurance letter, the permit application, and the denial letter. I also reached out to my neighbor Greg, who is popular in the neighborhood and has been quietly pushing back against Vanessa for months, because she tried to fine him for parking his RV in his own driveway. Greg told me that Vanessa has been doing this for years, targeting people she does not like and making up violations to squeeze them out or force them to sell. He said the best thing I could do was gather proof and wait for the right moment to use it, because if I went in swinging too early, she would just bury me in paperwork and procedural nonsense. So I waited. I hired the contractor anyway and told him to start work on a Saturday morning, which is outside the weekday quiet hours Vanessa loves to cite. The contractor showed up at 7, set up his auger, and started digging post holes. By 7:15, Vanessa was in my yard, screaming. She claimed that a contractor arriving during quiet hours made the entire project illegal, even though quiet hours are Monday through Friday before 8. I pointed this out. She ignored me and pulled out her phone, saying she was calling the police to report unauthorized construction. I told her to go ahead. She dialed. The operator asked her what the emergency was. She said there was a man digging holes without a permit. The operator asked if anyone was in danger. She said no. The operator told her to contact code enforcement during business hours and hung up. Vanessa turned red. She walked over to the contractor and told him he needed to stop immediately or she would have his truck towed. The contractor looked at me. I nodded and told him to keep working. Vanessa kicked an orange cone aside and stood directly in the path of the auger, blocking the work area but keeping her face visible. She said, "I will make an example out of you so everyone learns." I said nothing. I just pulled out my phone and started recording. She noticed and stepped back, but not before the wind picked up and snapped the loose caution tape we had strung around the work zone. The tape whipped across her face and she screamed, swatting at it like it was attacking her. The contractor stopped the auger and asked if we should reschedule. I told him no. I said we were going to finish at least half the post holes today because I had to leave for work at 8:30 and I could not afford to drag this out any longer. Vanessa heard that and smiled. She said, "Oh, you have a hard start time, that is perfect, because now I can keep you here as long as I want." She planted herself on the curb next to my driveway and pulled out her clipboard again, pretending to take notes. Every time the contractor moved equipment, she would stand up and wave her arms, shouting about setbacks and easements and code violations that did not exist. At 8, a tow truck pulled up. Vanessa had called them. The driver got out and asked whose vehicle needed to be moved. Vanessa pointed at the contractor's truck and said it was parked illegally in a fire lane, which was a lie because the truck was in my driveway. The driver looked confused. I walked over and showed him my property line on the survey. He shrugged and said he was not getting involved in an HOA dispute and left. Vanessa yelled after him that she would report him to his company. He waved without looking back. By 8:15, I was running out of time. I told the contractor to pack up and I would pay him for the morning and reschedule. He loaded his equipment and drove off. Vanessa walked up to me, smug, and said, "See, this is what happens when you do not follow the rules. You waste everyone's time and money." I did not respond. I got in my car and drove to work, but the entire day I was thinking about what Greg had told me. Wait for the right moment. Gather proof. Do not let her bait you into doing something stupid. That night I got another notice. This one was taped to my front door. It said I owed $400 in fines, that my fence project was permanently suspended, and that I had 72 hours to remove all materials from the property or the HOA would hire a crew to do it and bill me. I ripped the notice down and went inside. I checked the HOA portal again. Vanessa had posted more photos, these ones showing the post holes we had started, with a caption claiming I had damaged HOA common area drainage infrastructure. The photos were taken from an angle that made it look like the holes were outside my property line, but I knew they were not because I had marked every post location with spray paint based on the survey. The next morning I called the surveyor who had done my property line work and asked him to come back out and verify the post hole locations. He agreed and said he would be there that afternoon. While I waited, I went through the HOA covenants line by line, looking for anything Vanessa might have missed or misinterpreted. I found it in section 18-2, which states that any board member issuing fines or enforcement actions must provide written documentation of the violation, including photographic evidence with verified timestamps and a clear citation of the specific covenant section being violated. Vanessa's notices had none of that. The photos were recycled and altered. The timestamps were fake, and the covenant citations were vague or wrong. I also found something else. The covenants require that any fine over $100 must be approved by a majority vote of the board at a properly noticed meeting. Vanessa had issued a $400 fine on her own, with no meeting, no vote, and no notice to the other board members. I called Greg and told him what I had found. He laughed and said, "You have her. Now you just need to make sure she cannot wriggle out of it." He suggested I request a formal hearing under the dispute resolution section of the covenants, which would force the entire board to review the case and put Vanessa on the record. I submitted the hearing request that night. The management company confirmed receipt and scheduled it for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, I kept documenting. I set up a second camera angle on my back porch to cover the fence line, because one of my cameras was getting washed out by glare and reflections, and Vanessa had already tried to claim that the washed-out footage was the only proof allowed. I also called a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes and asked him to review my case. He looked over everything and said I had a strong argument, but he warned me that Vanessa would try to drag it out and bury me in procedural delays. He also said that if I could prove she was acting outside her authority and falsifying evidence, the board would have no choice but to remove her, or risk liability. The surveyor came back and verified every post hole location. He gave me a written report confirming that all the holes were within my property line and that there was no drainage easement in the area Vanessa had claimed. I added the report to my evidence file. That same night, Vanessa posted another round of photos, these ones showing my backyard at night with the caption "Late Night Construction Activity Disturbing Neighbors." The photos were taken at 9:30, well after quiet hours, but there was no construction happening. I was inside watching television. The photos showed my porch light on and my back door open, which Vanessa was trying to spin as proof of ongoing work. It was absurd, but it was also typical of how she operated. The hearing was set for a Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. I arrived early with Greg and my lawyer. Vanessa was already there, sitting at the head of the table with her rolled-up survey map in front of her like a gavel. The other board members trickled in, including the president, who looked uncomfortable, and the secretary, who avoided eye contact with me. The management company representative was also there, taking notes. The president called the meeting to order and asked Vanessa to present her case. She stood up and launched into a 15-minute monologue about how I had violated multiple sections of the covenants, ignored repeated warnings, damaged HOA property, and refused to cooperate with compliance inspections. She held up the recycled photos, the fake notices, and her own handwritten notes, which she claimed were official records. She ended by saying, "I will make an example out of you so everyone learns, and I recommend the board impose a lien on his property to recover all outstanding fines and enforcement costs." The room went quiet. The president asked if I wanted to respond. I said yes. I stood up and handed out copies of everything I had gathered: the original survey, the surveyor's verification report, the insurance letter, the permit application, the denial letter, the email thread with the management company, the screenshots of the altered photos with metadata, and the covenant section Vanessa had violated. I also handed out a printed transcript of the phone call Vanessa had made to the tow company, which I had obtained through a public records request because the tow company is contracted with the county and their dispatch logs are public. The transcript showed Vanessa threatening to have the contractor's truck towed without proper authority and lying about the fire lane. I then pulled out my phone and played a recording. It was from my doorbell camera, and it showed Vanessa arriving at my house at 11 at night, 3 days earlier, taping a notice to my door, and then standing on my porch for almost 2 minutes, looking around like she was checking to see if anyone was watching. The notice she taped up was the one claiming I owed $400 and had 72 hours to remove all materials. The timestamp on the video was clear. The president looked at Vanessa and asked if she had any explanation. She said the timestamp was wrong and that I had edited the video. I pulled out the original file with the embedded metadata and handed it to the management company representative, who confirmed it was unaltered. The president asked Vanessa why she had issued fines without board approval. She said she had the authority as finance committee lead. The president said that was not true and that the covenants require a board vote for any fine over $100. Vanessa said the covenants were outdated and that she had been issuing fines this way for years. The secretary spoke up and said she had never seen any of these fines on the financial reports. Vanessa said she kept them in a separate ledger. The president asked to see the ledger. Vanessa said she did not have it with her. Greg stood up and said he had been tracking Vanessa's enforcement actions for the past year, and that he had found at least 12 instances where she had issued fines without board approval, altered evidence, or fabricated violations. He handed out his own research, which included copies of notices sent to other homeowners, screenshots of portal posts, and a summary of complaints filed with the management company that had been ignored. The room exploded. Board members started arguing with each other. The management company representative said he was recommending an independent audit of all HOA finances and enforcement actions. Vanessa stood up and said she was not going to sit here and be attacked, and she walked out. The president called a recess. Greg and I stepped outside. He said, "You did it, she is done." I said, "We are not finished yet." I pulled out one more document, the one I had been holding back. It was an email from the HOA's attorney, sent to Vanessa 2 weeks earlier, refusing to continue representing the association in any enforcement actions against me, after reviewing the evidence and determining that her conduct constituted misconduct and potential fraud. The attorney had copied the management company and the board president, but Vanessa had buried the email and never disclosed it. I had obtained a copy through a direct request to the attorney, who was fed up with Vanessa's behavior and wanted to protect his own reputation. When the meeting reconvened, I handed the email to the president and asked if Vanessa had ever disclosed it. The president read it and turned pale. He said no. I said, "Then you need to know that your finance committee lead has been operating without legal backing for at least 2 weeks, and every action she has taken since then is potentially void." The management company representative agreed and said the association could be liable for damages if Vanessa had been acting outside her authority. The president asked what I wanted. I said I wanted the fines dismissed, the violation notices rescinded, my fence project approved, and Vanessa removed from the board. The board voted unanimously to dismiss all fines and rescind the notices. They also voted to approve my fence project on the spot, with no additional review. Then they voted to remove Vanessa from the finance committee and suspend her from all board activities pending the audit. The president said they would schedule a special election to fill her position. Greg grinned at me and said, "That is how you do it." If you are enjoying this, hit the like button and subscribe for more wild HOA stories. 2 days later, I was back in my yard with the contractor, finishing the post holes. Vanessa drove by twice but did not stop. The second time, she slowed down and stared, and I waved. She sped off. Greg came over with a 6-pack and we sat on my back porch, watching the contractor pour concrete for the posts. He said the neighborhood portal had been blowing up all day with people demanding to know what had happened at the meeting. The management company had posted a statement saying that Vanessa Moore was no longer on the finance committee and that all enforcement actions issued by her were under review. People were celebrating. The next week, I got a letter from the HOA's insurance carrier. It was addressed to the board president and copied to all homeowners. It stated that the carrier had been notified of potential misconduct and fraud within the association, and that they were issuing a non-renewal warning unless the board implemented reforms within 30 days. The reforms included mandatory board training, independent financial audits, and a third-party review of all enforcement actions. The letter also said that if the reforms were not completed, the entire neighborhood could lose coverage. The board caved immediately. They hired an outside firm to audit the financials, and within a week, the auditors found over $20,000 in questionable line items that Vanessa had added over the past 3 years. Some of the charges were legitimate but poorly documented. Others were completely fabricated. The board voted to require actual evidence before fines, which meant every violation notice now had to include verified photos, clear covenant citations, and board approval for any fine over $50. They also voted to remove Vanessa's favorite fee, a $15 quarterly compliance review charge that she had invented and been collecting for years, from the budget entirely. It turned out the fee was imaginary, never authorized by the board, and Vanessa had been pocketing the money. The auditors found it in the ledger under a miscellaneous income line that no one had ever questioned. Greg ran for Vanessa's vacant seat in the special election and won by a landslide. His first act was to propose a new rule requiring all board members to disclose any enforcement actions they initiate and to recuse themselves from votes involving properties they have a personal dispute with. The rule passed unanimously. The neighborhood portal turned into a celebration forum, with people posting photos of their own fence projects, RV parking setups, and landscaping jobs that Vanessa had tried to shut down over the years. I finished my fence 2 weeks later. It was exactly on my property line, exactly the right height, and exactly in compliance with every covenant. I sent a photo to the management company and asked them to update my file. They did, and they also sent me a refund check for the $50 permit review fee because Vanessa's denial had been invalid. I framed the check and hung it in my garage. One afternoon, I was pulling into my driveway when I saw Vanessa standing at the USPS mailbox cluster curb with her clipboard blocking the path. She was waiting for me. I parked and got out. She said, "You think you won, but this is not over. I still live here, and I will make your life miserable." I said, "Actually, it is over, because I have the entire board, the management company, the attorney, and the insurance carrier on my side, and you have nothing but a reputation for fraud." A sheriff's deputy happened to be driving by and saw the confrontation. He pulled over and asked if everything was okay. Vanessa said yes. The deputy looked at me. I said she was blocking the mailbox. The deputy told Vanessa to step back. She did, muttering under her breath. The deputy asked if there was an ongoing dispute. I said yes, but it had been resolved by the HOA board. Vanessa said I was lying. The deputy asked if either of us wanted to file a report. I said no. Vanessa said no. The deputy told us both to stay civil and left. Vanessa glared at me and said, "I can fine you daily until you give up and you cry." I pulled out my phone and said, "You said that exact line the day this started, and I have it on video, and the board used it as evidence of your intent to harass me. So if you want to keep going, I will hand this officer the proof and ask for an incident number immediately." Vanessa went silent. She turned and walked back to her house. That was the last time she tried to confront me directly. Over the next month, she stopped attending board meetings. She stopped posting on the neighborhood portal. She stopped driving by my house. Greg told me she had put her house on the market and was planning to move. I did not feel bad. She had spent years terrorizing people, and she finally got caught. The fence project became a turning point for the neighborhood. Other homeowners started submitting their own project applications, knowing the new board would actually review them fairly. The management company hired a new compliance officer who understood the difference between legitimate violations and personal vendettas. The insurance carrier completed their review and renewed the association's coverage after confirming the reforms were in place. I ran into the contractor a few weeks later at a hardware store. He said he had been telling everyone about the job, and he had gotten 3 more fence projects in the neighborhood because people trusted him after seeing how he handled Vanessa's harassment. He thanked me for standing my ground and said most people would have just given up. I told him I could not afford to give up because my insurance was on the line and I needed to keep my home stable. Greg hosted a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate the board changes. About 30 people showed up. Everyone wanted to hear the story. I told them the short version, but Greg kept interrupting to add details, like the part where Vanessa kicked the orange cone aside and stood in the auger's path, or the part where the tow truck driver waved her off without even getting out of his truck. People laughed, but they also said they were grateful someone had finally stood up to her. One guy told me Vanessa had tried to fine him $500 for painting his front door the wrong shade of gray, and when he pushed back, she threatened to put a lien on his house. He said he paid the fine just to make her go away. I told him he should file for a refund now that the auditors had confirmed most of her fines were bogus. He said he would. The best moment came a month later, during a regular board meeting. The new finance committee lead presented the first clean quarterly report in years. Every line item was documented, every expense was approved, every fine was legitimate and backed by evidence. The report also included a full accounting of the refunds issued to homeowners who had been overcharged by Vanessa. The total was over $8,000. The board voted to send apology letters to everyone affected. At the end of the meeting, the president stood up and said, "I want to apologize to everyone who was targeted by the previous finance committee lead, and I want to thank the homeowner who brought this to our attention. Because without his documentation and persistence, we would still be operating under a system that allowed abuse." Everyone clapped. I did not say anything. I just nodded. Vanessa's house sold 2 months later. I did not see her again. Greg told me she moved to a different neighborhood about 20 miles away, one with no HOA. He said it was probably for the best, because if she had stayed, people would have made her life impossible. I said I did not care where she went, as long as she was not here. My fence is still standing. It is solid, level, and exactly where it should be. My insurance renewed without issue. The neighborhood is quieter now, in a good way. People are not afraid to submit project applications or ask questions at board meetings. The portal is still active, but instead of accusations and threats, it is full of recommendations for contractors, tips for landscaping, and photos of finished projects. I still see the post hole digger in my garage sometimes, leaning against the wall next to the framed refund check. It reminds me that standing your ground is worth it, even when someone is screaming in your face and threatening to bury you in paperwork. Vanessa thought she could bully me into giving up, but she underestimated how much I hate sloppy paperwork and how far I was willing to go to protect my home. The board election challenge that flipped the power dynamic was not just about removing one bad actor. It was about proving that the system could work if people were willing to push back and demand accountability. Greg and I still talk about it sometimes, usually when another HOA horror story pops up on the neighborhood portal from a different community. We shake our heads and remind each other that we fixed ours, and that is all we can do. Karen lost her committee role immediately after the vote, and the HOA had to require actual evidence before fines, because the insurance carrier would not renew otherwise. Her favorite fee, the one she had been collecting for years, was proven imaginary in the ledger, and every homeowner who had paid it got a refund. She thought she could fine me daily until I gave up and cried, but instead, I handed the officer on scene the proof and asked for an incident number. and that was the end of her grip on the neighborhood. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you being here.